Everything you know about the first Thanksgiving is wrong. No mashed potatoes, no pumpkin pie, no turkey on a platter. October 1621, Plymouth Colony, Massachusetts. 50 pilgrims who survived brutal winter. 90 Wampanoag guests who saved them from starvation. 3 days of celebration after successful harvest, the 1621 feast looked nothing like your table. Nothing like Norman Rockwell paintings. Nothing like elementary school pageants taught you to imagine. No marshmallows, no cranberry sauce, no dinner rolls. Most foods we call traditional Thanksgiving didn't exist at that first feast. Some weren't in New England yet. Some weren't in America at all. Some hadn't been invented. Edward Winslow documented this feast in his journal. William Bradford recorded details in his history. Wampanoag, oral tradition, preserved their perspective. We know what they actually ate. Today, I'm separating myth from reality. When Thanksgiving wasn't about abundance, it was about survival, gratitude, alliance between cultures that would soon turn tragic. Stay with me. These 22 truths destroy everything you thought you knew about the first Thanksgiving and reveal something far more interesting than the myths. Number 1. Roasted turkey centerpiece before Victorian era. First Thanksgiving had no roasted turkey centerpiece. After 1800s, turkey became symbol. Myth replaced reality. Romanticism rewrote history. October 1621, when Pilgrims and Wampanoag gathered for 3-day harvest celebration. William Bradford's journal mentions great store of wild fowl but doesn't specify turkey as centerpiece. Ducks, geese, swans were more common, easier to hunt in coastal Massachusetts. They didn't roast whole birds on spits, not traditional English method, not practical for feeding 140 people over 3 days. Stewing stretched meat further, fed more people, wasted nothing. Pilgrims cut fowl into pieces, simmered them in large pots over open fires. Ducks and geese provided fat that enriched broth. Swans now protected, then abundant tatted meat. Water from nearby stream, salt from sea, wild onions from forest created simple but nourishing stew. During October 1621, harvest celebration focused on survival and gratitude, not presentation. Stewing was practical one-pot cooking, continuous serving, easy to reheat. No ovens existed for roasting. No traditions yet established for how Thanksgiving should look. The stew bubbled in iron pots brought from England. Fat rose to surface, creating richness. Meat fell from bones after hours of cooking. Broth thickened with cornmeal. Every part of fowl used, nothing wasted when survival was recent memory. Bradford wrote about abundance of fowl. Later generations assumed he meant roasted turkey centerpiece. Victorian Americans created image of golden turkey on platter symbol of their own prosperity projected backward onto starving colonists who ate stew. That wild fowl stew fed 140 people for 3 days. Practical, nourishing, communal, not Instagram-worthy, not Norman Rockwell beautiful, but real, and sufficient for people grateful just to have survived long enough to harvest anything. Every bowl carried survival. Stew stretches resources. Victorian myth replaces reality. Truth simmers in iron pots over open fires. Number 2. Mashed potatoes. Before 1600s, potatoes didn't exist in North America. After Spanish conquest, potatoes came from Peru, spread slowly through Europe. October 1621. Potatoes hadn't reached New England yet. Impossible ingredient for first Thanksgiving. Pilgrims knew potatoes from Europe knew food, suspicious, associated with poverty and disease. English barely accepted them. North American colonists wouldn't plant them for another century. Massachusetts soil hadn't felt potato seed yet. No mashed potatoes, no baked potatoes, no potatoes of any kind. The side dish Americans consider most traditional didn't exist at the meal that started the tradition. Later generations couldn't imagine feast without them, assumed they'd always been there. Instead, pilgrims ate cornmeal porridge maize taught by Wampanoag, ground between stones, boiled into thick mush. Corn was survival crop, strange to English palates but abundant after first successful harvest. Porridge-filled bellies provided calories, replaced wheat flour they couldn't grow yet. During October 1621, corn represented alliance with Wampanoag. Squanto taught planting methods, showed how to use fish as fertilizer, explained when to harvest. Without corn, pilgrims would have starved. Cornmeal porridge was gratitude in edible form. The porridge was bland, no butter, no milk, no sugar, just ground corn and water, maybe salt if they were lucky, thick enough to eat with fingers or wooden spoons. Nothing like fluffy mashed potatoes, but sustaining nonetheless. Potatoes wouldn't appear on American Thanksgiving tables until 1700s by then. The myth was growing. People assumed pilgrims ate familiar foods, projected their own tables backward. Mashed potatoes seemed so obvious they couldn't imagine feast without them. But truth is simpler and stranger. First Thanksgiving had no potatoes, just corn, just survival, just gratitude for harvest. That meant not starving through second winter in New England. Every spoonful carried alliance. Corn saved colonies. Myths erase indigenous contributions. Reality was cross-cultural survival through shared knowledge. Number 3. Pumpkin pie before sugar trade. No refined sugar in Plymouth Colony. Before wheat, no flour for pie crust. October 1621, pumpkins existed, but pies didn't. Math doesn't allow for pie. Pilgrims saw pumpkins growing in Wampanoag gardens, huge orange squash unlike anything in England. Indigenous peoples had cultivated them for thousands of years. Pilgrims learned to recognize them, to harvest them, to eat them because Wampanoag taught them. They didn't make pie. They boiled pumpkin chunks in water until soft, no sugar to sweeten it, no spices except maybe wild herbs, no crust to hold it, just orange vegetable boiled plain and eaten because it provided food. The boiled pumpkin was bland, watery, nothing like spiced custard pie Americans expect. They ate it anyway. Hunger makes anything palatable. Survival means eating what grows, preparing it simply, being grateful it exists at all. During October 1621, cooking methods were limited to boiling and roasting over open fires. No ovens for baking pies. No sugar for sweetening. No butter for crust, even if they'd had flour. Pumpkin pie was impossible. Ingredients didn't exist. Equipment didn't exist. Tradition didn't exist yet. Some historians think pilgrims might have hollowed pumpkins, filled them with milk and honey and spices, then roasted them whole. No evidence proves this happened at 1621 feast. More likely, they just boiled chunks and ate them plain. Pumpkin pie became Thanksgiving tradition much later 1700s, when sugar became available, when wheat grew successfully, when colonists could afford butter and spices. By then the myth was forming. Surely, pilgrims ate pie. Everyone eats pie. Pie must have always existed. But reality is less sweet. First Thanksgiving featured plain boiled pumpkin survival vegetable, not dessert. Orange mush that kept people alive through winter. Nothing more, nothing less, nothing like the spiced custard we call traditional. Every bite carried sustenance. Dessert is luxury concept. Sugar creates myths. Reality was plain orange vegetable keeping colonists alive. Would you eat plain boiled pumpkin for Thanksgiving? Could you call it pie? Drop a comment. Tell me if you could accept reality over myth. Number 4. Cranberry sauce before sugar. Cranberry sauce impossible without sweetener. Before canning, no way to make jelly. October 1621. Cranberries grew wild, but couldn't be made into sauce without sugar that didn't exist yet. Pilgrims saw cranberries growing in bog small red berries, Wampanoag used medicinally, and as dye. Indigenous peoples understood their properties, their uses, their value. Pilgrims were still learning which red berries were safe and which were poison. They might have eaten cranberries, raw extremely tart, mouth-puckeringly sour, bitter without sweetening. Maybe they tried them. Maybe Wampanoag guests ate them. Maybe they were part of feast. But sauce? Impossible without sugar to balance tartness. Raw cranberries taste astringent, almost medicinal. Nothing like sweet tart sauce from a can. Eating them raw meant enduring sourness, accepting bitterness, finding value in preservation properties rather than flavor. Survival food, not celebration sauce. During October 1621, sugar was more valuable than gold. Ships brought tiny amounts from Caribbean at enormous cost. Colonists saved it for medicine, for preserving, for emergencies. Using it to sweeten cranberries for one feast would have been wasteful, impossible, unthinkable. If cranberries appeared at feast, they were garnish or medicine, not sauce. Small bowl of raw berries, perhaps, offered as digestive aid. Nothing cooked, nothing sweetened, nothing resembling the red jelly that wobbles on modern tables. Cranberry sauce became traditional much later 1800s when sugar became affordable. When cooking techniques advanced, when someone figured out pectin in cranberries made them set into jelly naturally. Before that, cranberries stayed sour, stayed raw, stayed medicinal rather than culinary. That first feast may have included cranberries, but sauce. No, just tart red berries, mouth-puckering and bitter. Eaten because they grew nearby, and Wampanoag knew they were safe. Reality is sourer than myth. Every berry carried bitterness. Sweetness requires resources. Sugar transforms everything. Reality was mouth-puckering tartness without relief. Number 5. Sweet potato casserole. Before colonial trade, sweet potatoes grew in Caribbean and South America, not New England. Before 1700s, sweet potatoes hadn't reached Massachusetts colonies. October 1621, impossible ingredient thousands of miles from Plymouth. Sweet potatoes were tropical crop, warm climate, long growing season, southern soil. Massachusetts was too cold, season too short, climate too harsh. Even regular potatoes didn't grow there yet. Sweet potatoes were doubly impossible wrong latitude entirely. The dish Americans call traditional sweet potatoes with marshmallows and brown sugar was invented in 1917 by Marshmallow Company as marketing scheme. Not traditional, not historical, not even particularly old. Commercial advertisement disguised as tradition. Pilgrims had never seen sweet potato. Wampanoag had never seen sweet potato. No one at 1621 feast knew sweet potatoes existed. They ate squash instead, similar orange color, similar texture when cooked, but completely different plant, from completely different origin. During October 1621, Wampanoag grew three sisters corn. Beans squashed together in same field. Squash vines sprawled between corn stalks. Beans climbed the stalks, all supporting each other. This was the orange vegetable at feast, not sweet potatoes from thousands of miles south. The squash was winter squash hard-shelled, stored through winter, providing food when nothing else grew. Pilgrims learned to recognize it, to harvest it, to cook it simply by boiling or roasting. Bland, firm, nothing like sweet marshmallow casserole. Sweet potatoes appeared on Thanksgiving tables much later, after trade routes established, after southern crops reached northern markets, after someone decided orange vegetables were Thanksgiving requirement regardless of historical accuracy. Truth is, most traditional Thanksgiving foods are modern inventions. Commercial creations, myths we accepted because they felt right. Sweet potato casserole is particularly egregious. Not only wasn't it at first feast, it was invented as advertisement. Every bite of casserole carries lies. Geography limits ingredients. Marketing creates traditions. Reality was different. Squash, simpler preparation. No marshmallows for 3 centuries. Number 6. Dinner rolls before wheat. English wheat didn't grow in Massachusetts yet. Before flour mills, no way to grind wheat fine enough for bread. October 1621. Wheat flour didn't exist in Plymouth, making dinner rolls impossible. Pilgrims brought wheat seed from England, their familiar grain, their traditional bread, their cultural identity in seed form, but English wheat failed in New England soil. Too acidic, too cold, too different from fields they'd known in England. They tried planting wheat through 1621. Every attempt failed. Seeds rotted, stalks withered, harvest failed. By October harvest celebration, they'd accepted reality wheat wouldn't grow. Bread, as they knew it, was impossible. They'd starve if they didn't adapt. Wampanoag taught them to grind corn between stones, mix with water, shape into cakes, cook on hot stones beside fire. Cornmeal cakes were dense, heavy, nothing like fluffy wheat rolls, but they provided bread-equivalent filled bellies, demonstrated indigenous knowledge saving colonists again. During October 1621, cornmeal cakes represented survival through adaptation. English identity required wheat bread-eating corn, meant accepting they weren't in England anymore. Accepting indigenous knowledge, accepting that America demanded different food, different farming, different thinking entirely. The cakes were coarse-textured, slightly sweet from corn, nothing like soft white rolls. No yeast, they didn't rise. No buttered dairy cows wouldn't arrive for years, just ground corn, water, heat, simple survival food that kept people alive. Dinner rolls became traditional much later 1700s when wheat finally adapted to American soil. When mills ground flour properly, when colonists could afford to prefer wheat over corn again, but first feast. No rolls, just corn cakes teaching English to eat like Americans. Those cornmeal cakes carried more than calories. They represented cultural exchange, forced adaptation, indigenous generosity teaching colonists to survive. Every bite was admission that English knowledge alone couldn't sustain them here. Every cake carried humility. Wheat failed English colonists. Corn saved them through indigenous teaching. Reality was coarse cornmeal, no soft white rolls. Number 7. Green bean casserole. Before French's fried onions, green bean casserole was invented in 1955 by Campbell's Soup Company. Before October, green beans finished producing in summer, not available during fall harvest celebration. October 1621. Green beans are warm season crop, planted in spring, harvested in summer, finished producing by August. October harvest celebration was till late frost had killed bean plants weeks earlier. No fresh green beans existed in October. The casserole itself is modern creation canned soup, frozen beans. Fried onions combined for easy dish during 1950s suburbia. Campbell's created it as recipe using their products. Nothing traditional, nothing historical, nothing remotely Pilgrim about it. Pilgrims might have eaten dried beans stored from summer harvest. Wampanoag grew several bean varieties as part of Three Sisters agriculture. But fresh green beans at October feast? Seasonally impossible, and casserole with cream of mushroom soup? Absurdly impossible. During October 1621, available vegetables were fall harvest squash, pumpkins, corn, root vegetables, whatever survived until frost. Tender summer crops like green beans were long gone, remembered fondly perhaps, but not available for feast regardless of desire. If beans appeared at feast at all, they were dried beans, soaked and boiled firm, bland, sustaining. No creamy sauce, no crunchy topping, no easy casserole. Just boiled beans eaten because protein was precious and waste was unthinkable. Green bean casserole became Thanksgiving tradition through marketing, not history. 1950s advertisers convinced Americans it was essential. Baby boomers grew up eating it, taught their children it was traditional, never questioned whether Pilgrims actually ate it. Truth reveals how many Thanksgiving traditions are corporate inventions created to sell soup, sell marshmallows, sell products using holiday nostalgia. Green bean casserole is particularly egregious, not even seasonally possible, much less historically accurate. Every bite of casserole carries commercial lies. Seasons limit availability. Marketing invents tradition. Reality was no green beans at autumn feast. Number 8. Stuffing inside turkey before Victorian era. First Thanksgiving had no roasted turkey centerpiece. After 1800s, turkey became symbol, myth replaced reality. Romanticism rewrote history. October 1621, when Pilgrims and Wampanoag gathered for 3-day harvest celebration. William Bradford's journal mentions great store of wild fowl but doesn't specify turkey as centerpiece. Ducks, geese, swans were more common, easier to hunt in coastal Massachusetts. They didn't roast whole birds on spits, not traditional English method, not practical for feeding 140 people over 3 days. Stewing stretched meat further, fed more people, wasted nothing. Pilgrims cut fowl into pieces, simmered them in large pots over open fires. Ducks and geese provided fat that enriched broth. Swans now protected, then abundant tatted meat. Water from nearby stream, salt from sea, wild onions from forest created simple but nourishing stew. During October 1621, harvest celebration focused on survival and gratitude, not presentation. Stewing was practical one-pot cooking, continuous serving, easy to reheat. No ovens existed for roasting. No traditions yet established for how Thanksgiving should look. The stew bubbled in iron pots brought from England. Fat rose to surface, creating richness. Meat fell from bones after hours of cooking. Broth thickened with cornmeal. Every part of fowl used, nothing wasted when survival was recent memory. Bradford wrote about abundance of fowl. Later generations assumed he meant roasted turkey centerpiece. Victorian Americans created image of golden turkey on platter symbol of their own prosperity projected backward onto starving colonists who ate stew. That wild fowl stew fed 140 people for 3 days. Practical, nourishing, communal, not Instagram-worthy, not Norman Rockwell beautiful, but real, and sufficient for people grateful just to have survived long enough to harvest anything. Every bowl carried survival. Stew stretches resources. Victorian myth replaces reality. Truth simmers in iron pots over open fires. Number 9. Apple cider before cider. Apple trees didn't exist in Plymouth yet. Before orchards, English apples needed years to establish. October 1621. No apples meant no cider, despite myth of pilgrims toasting with cider mugs. Pilgrims brought apple seeds from England, treasured cargo, representing future orchards, future harvests, future taste of home, but apple trees take years to mature, years to produce fruit. Seeds planted in 1620 or 1621 wouldn't bear apples until mid-1620s at earliest. They drank water from springs and streams, maybe weak beer if they'd managed to brew some from barley. Nothing fancy, nothing fermented from fruit they didn't have. Just hydration, nothing celebratory, nothing matching nostalgic images of cider toasting pilgrims. Water was safer in New England than England cleaner streams. Less population, less contamination. They'd feared American water at first, but learned it was actually better than what they'd left behind. Small mercy in harsh new world. During October 1621, beverage options were limited water mostly. Weak beer possibly, nothing else available. No wine grapes didn't grow there. No cider apples didn't exist yet. No tea or coffee wouldn't reach colonies for decades. Just water and gratitude, it was clean. The myth of cider-drinking pilgrims came much later. Romantic image of colonial prosperity. Apple-cheeked colonists toasting harvest with mugs of cider. Reality was harsher. They drank water and were grateful to have it clean and abundant. Apple orchards eventually flourished in New England. Cider became colonial drink, American tradition, association with harvest festivals. By 1700s, hard cider was everywhere. Easy to project that backward onto first feast, forgetting trees need time to grow. That first feast featured water from clear streams, possibly weak beer from precious grain. Nothing fancy, nothing fermented from non-existent fruit, just hydration for people grateful to be alive, to have survived, to have clean water in abundance. Every sip carried simplicity. Trees need years to mature. Myths add celebration. Reality was water, maybe weak beer, nothing more festive. Number 10, pecan pie before Southern trade. Pecans grew in southern states, not New England. Before sugar, pie required sweetener that didn't exist. October 1621. Wrong region for pecans, wrong century for pie, double impossibility. Pecans are native to American South Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, warm climates far from Massachusetts. Indigenous peoples there used them for centuries. But Wampanoag in Massachusetts had never seen pecans. Trees don't grow that far north. The pie itself is relatively modern invention, late 1800s, when Caro syrup was invented. When Southern cooks created recipes using the new product, Corn Syrup Company promoted pecan pie recipes, marketing not ancient tradition. Created this classic. Pilgrims and Wampanoag had chestnuts instead. Trees grew abundantly in Massachusetts forests. Nuts fell in autumn, providing food that could be roasted, boiled, ground into flour. Different nut, different region, different uses. But no pies, still no sugar, still no ovens. During October 1621, nuts were valuable food, source protein, fat, storability through winter. Wampanoag taught colonists which nuts were edible, when to gather them, how to process them. Chestnuts were autumn gift, gathered from forests and roasted over fires. If anything resembling nut desert appeared, it was roasted chestnut. Simple preparation. Heat over fire, crack and eat. Not pie, not sweetened, not baked in crust. Just nuts roasted, like humans had done for millennia before sugar or ovens existed. Pecan pie became Thanksgiving tradition because it's delicious, because it uses American ingredient, because marketing promoted it successfully. But tradition doesn't equal history. Delicious doesn't mean authentic. Popular doesn't mean pilgrims ate it. That first feast featured no pecan pie. Wrong nuts, wrong region, wrong century. Maybe roasted chestnuts, maybe other local nuts. But pie, impossible on multiple levels. Reality is simpler and less sweet than myth. Every slice of pecan pie carries modern lies. Geography limits ingredients. Marketing creates traditions. Reality was chestnuts roasted over open fires. Number 11. Whipped cream before dairy cows. No cows in Plymouth Colony yet. Before cream, no milk meant no cream. October 1621. Impossible ingredient that wouldn't exist in Massachusetts for years after first feast. Pilgrims left England without bringing cows. Expensive to transport. Difficult to keep alive on Atlantic crossing. Impractical for desperate settlers. First cattle arrived in Plymouth in 1624, 3 years after the first Thanksgiving. No cows meant no milk, no cream, no butter, no dairy of any kind. Whipped cream requires heavy cream beaten until it holds peaks. Requires dairy cows producing milk rich enough to separate cream. Requires prosperity allowing luxury of separating cream just for dessert. Requires everything Plymouth didn't have in October 1621. They drank water. They cooked without butter. They ate vegetables without cream sauce. Every recipe depended on ingredients that actually existed. Dairy simply wasn't available. Animals hadn't arrived yet. Infrastructure didn't exist. Prosperity was a distant dream. During October 1621, colonists struggled just to survive. Dairy cows were luxury years away. Feast used available ingredients: wild game, seafood, corn, squash, nuts, berries, nothing requiring animals they didn't own yet. The image of pilgrims topping pie with whipped cream is Victorian invention romantic projection of prosperity backward onto desperate settlers. Paintings show laden tables with cream-topped pies. Reality was no cream, no pies, no Victorian abundance. Dairy arrived slowly in Plymouth, first cows in 1624. Years more before herds produced excess milk. Decades before cream became common enough to whip for dessert. First Thanksgiving was dairy-free by necessity, not choice. That feast featured no whipped cream, no butter, no milk, no cheese. Entirely dairy-free celebration, because animals simply didn't exist yet in Ptolemy. Modern Thanksgiving without dairy seems impossible. First Thanksgiving had no choice. Every dollop of whipped cream carries impossible myth. Cows hadn't arrived yet. Dairy came years later. Reality was complete absence of milk, cream, butter, cheese. Would you eat Thanksgiving without any dairy? Could you imagine feast that sparse? Hit like if you're starting to see the truth. Number 12. Venison stew. October 1621, Wampanoag leader Massasoit arrived with 90 men. They brought 5 deer massive contribution to feast, evidence of alliance, demonstration of generosity that colonists couldn't match. Venison was celebration meat, gift that changed everything. Edward Winslow documented this explicitly. Massasoit's men hunted and delivered 5 deer specifically for feast. This wasn't myth or speculation. Primary source confirms it. 5 deer meant hundreds of pounds of meat when colonists' hunting had yielded much less. They butchered deer, immediately meat, spoiled quickly without refrigeration, especially in autumn warmth. They cut it into chunks, distributed it between multiple pots, stewed it over fires that burned continuously through 3-day celebration. Stewing tenderized tough venison, created rich broth, fed maximum people. The stew was simple deer meat, water, salt, whatever wild herbs grew nearby. No fancy spices, no wine for deglazing, no culinary sophistication. Just meat and water, becoming nourishing stew through time and heat and necessity. During October 1621, venison represented Wampanoag generosity and hunting prowess. 5 deer demonstrated their ability to provide, their willingness to share, their commitment to alliance. Colonists ate this gift knowing they'd nearly starved without indigenous help. The venison stewed for hours, meat falling tender from bones, fat enriching broth, creating smell that marked feast as special. 90 Wampanoag men and 50 pilgrims gathered around pots, eating together, celebrating harvest and alliance and mutual survival. This was most important dish at first Thanksgiving, not turkey, not pie, but venison brought by indigenous allies. Gift that fed everyone, meat that demonstrated partnership, stew that symbolized everything feast represented. Alliance made edible. That venison stew tasted like gratitude, like alliance, like colonists' recognition that they survived only through indigenous generosity. Every bowl carried political meaning, cultural exchange, acknowledgement that survival required cooperation across vast cultural differences. Every bite carried truth. Indigenous generosity saved colonists. Venison proved alliance. Reality was cross-cultural feast, not pilgrim achievement alone. Number 13. Roasted eel, October 1621. Eels were abundant in Massachusetts waters, rivers, streams, marshes full of them. Wampanoag had harvested eels for thousands of years, knew where to find them, how to catch them, how to prepare them. They taught colonists these skills. Pilgrims initially found eels disgusting, slimy, snake-like, disturbing to English sensibilities. But hunger overcomes prejudice. They learned to catch eels, to appreciate them, to recognize them as valuable food source when more familiar foods weren't available. They roasted eels over open fires, simplest preparation, no pots needed, fat from eel flesh preventing it from drying out. The eels sizzled and popped as fat dripped into flames. Skin crisped, meat stayed moist, smell was rich and fishy and foreign to English noses. The roasted eel tasted oily, rich, completely unlike any fish pilgrims knew from England. Strong flavor, fatty texture, nothing delicate or refined, but substantial and filling. One eel provided significant protein and fat that colonists needed desperately. During October 1621, seafood sustained Plymouth Colony. Ocean and rivers provided abundance when land yielded little. Eels were particularly valuably available year-round, easy to catch, high in fat that malnourished colonists needed for winter survival. Wampanoag guests likely prepared eels for feast. They knew techniques colonists were still learning. Roasting was communal activity, multiple eels over multiple fires, everyone contributing to meal preparation. Cultural exchange through cooking, through eating, through sharing knowledge. Modern Americans find eels disgusting, can't imagine them at Thanksgiving. But first feast definitely included them, documented in sources, consistent with available food sources, important part of coastal New England diet. Our disgust doesn't change historical reality. That roasted eel represented cultural bridge. Wampanoag, teaching English to eat American foods, to overcome prejudices, to survive through adaptation. Every bite was lesson in humility, in flexibility, in accepting that American abundance came in unfamiliar forms. Every bite carried adaptation. Prejudice yields to hunger. Indigenous knowledge saves colonists again. Reality was roasted eel, disgusting to modern palates, essential to survival. Number 14. October 1621. Lobster was so abundant in Massachusetts that it washed ashore in piles, could be gathered by hand, was considered poor man's food, unworthy of respect. Indigenous peoples had eaten it for thousands of years. Colonists learned to accept it. Pilgrims initially scorned lobster, bottom feeder, insect of the sea, food for servants and prisoners, not respectable English fare. But desperate people eat what's available. They learned lobster was edible, abundant, free for the taking along rocky shores. They boiled lobsters in seawater, simplest preparation, no seasoning needed, salt from ocean providing flavor. Huge pots of boiling water over fires, lobsters added until shells turned red, meat cooked through basic preparation for food they still considered beneath them. The boiled lobster tasted sweet and briny ocean flavor, intensified by seawater cooking method. Meat was chewy, required effort to extract from shells, messy eating that offended English dining sensibilities. But filling and protein-rich when winter threatened starvation. During October 1621, lobster represented New England's abundance and colonists' continuing prejudices. They ate it because they needed protein, not because they'd learned to value it. Feast included lobster because it was available, abundant, easy to gather, not because anyone considered it delicacy. Wampanoag had no such prejudices. Lobster was food, one of many gifts from sea, taken and eaten with gratitude. Cultural attitudes toward food revealed broader cultural differences: English hierarchies versus indigenous pragmatism, European snobbery versus American abundance. Lobster wouldn't become expensive delicacy until 1800s, when railroad made it available inland, when scarcity created value, when distance from source transformed trash fish into luxury. First Thanksgiving lobster was cheap, scorned, eaten reluctantly by prejudiced colonists. That boiled lobster tasted like humility, like accepting that America didn't follow English rules, like learning that abundant food could come in forms they'd never respect. Every bite challenged their assumptions about what food should be. Every bite carried class tension. Abundant food seems worthless. Time transforms trash to treasure. Reality was lobster as poor man's protein, not luxury delicacy. Number 15. Steamed mussels and clams. October 1621. Shellfish covered Massachusetts shores. Mussels, clinging to rocks. Clams buried in sand, both available in quantities that astonished colonists. Indigenous peoples harvested them sustainably for thousands of years, taught colonists where and how to gather. Pilgrims initially avoided shellfish. European superstitions associated them with disease, poverty, desperation, but Wampanoag demonstrated their safety, their abundance, their value. Colonists learned to overcome prejudices, to dig clams, to gather mussels, to accept American foods on American terms. They steamed shellfish over fires, seaweed laid on hot coals, shellfish piled on seaweed, more seaweed covering them, steam from moisture cooking them through. Ancient preparation method Wampanoag taught, practical technique requiring no pots, creating tender, succulent meat. The steamed mussels and clams opened naturally when cooked, revealing sweet, briny meat inside. They ate them hot from shells, probably using shells as spoons for meat and broth. Simple, communal eating. No silverware, no plates, just shells and fingers, and gratitude for abundance. During October 1621, shellfish represented yet another food source colonists had to learn to accept. English prejudices against low foods had to yield to American reality-abundant food shouldn't be refused because it didn't match expectations. Survival required flexibility. Feast included massive amounts of shellfish easily gathered, easily prepared, abundant enough to feed 140 people without depleting resources. Practical food for large gathering, evidence of coastal locations' advantages, demonstration of what America offered to those willing to adapt. Modern Thanksgiving never includes mussels or clams to associate it with other meals. Not traditional enough, too far from Victorian myth of Pilgrim feast. But historical Thanksgiving definitely included them documented, practical, consistent with available resources. That steamed shellfish tasted like the ocean, like abundance, like America's gifts to those willing to accept them. Every mussel, every clam represented lesson in humility. Accept what land and sea provide. Release prejudices, eat gratefully. Every shell carried teachings. Prejudice blocks survival. Indigenous knowledge reveals abundance. Reality was piles of shellfish, free food from generous shore. Number 16. Wild turkey boiled. October 1621. Wild turkeys did exist in Massachusetts. Bradford mentioned them in his writings, but they weren't roasted golden on platters. They were tough, gamey, required long cooking. Boiling tenderized them, stretched them further, fed more people than roasting could. Wild turkey was nothing like modern grocery store birds, smaller, tougher, stronger flavored from forest diet of nuts and insects. They'd fly away if approached, had to be hunted carefully, weren't plentiful enough to center entire feast. One bird among many dishes, they boiled turkeys, cut into pieces joints, separated, meat stewed until tender. Hours of cooking to break down tough muscle, create edible meat, produce broth that could flavor other dishes. Nothing fancy, nothing recognizable as modern Thanksgiving turkey. The boiled turkey tasted gamey and strong, none of the mild white meat modern Americans expect. Dark, tough flavor, intense from birds' wild diet. Edible but requiring acquired taste, acceptance that wild food tastes different from domesticated versions. During October 1621, wild turkey was one protein among many venison, waterfowl, eel, shellfish, all more plentiful. Turkey's later symbolic importance had nothing to do with first feast. Benjamin Franklin's proposal to make it national bird came 150 years later. Boiled turkey pieces were distributed through the stew, mixed with other meats, combined in communal pots. Not centerpiece, not separate dish, not golden roasted bird presented on platter. Just meat contributing to collective meal feeding everyone. Victorian era transformed turkey into Thanksgiving symbol prosperity, American abundance, nostalgic national identity. They projected that backward, assumed pilgrims centered feast on turkey. Reality was much less turkey-focused, much more diverse and practical in protein sources. That boiled wild turkey was forgettable, unremarkable, just one protein among many available. Nothing special about it, nothing marking it as more important than venison or duck or goose. Symbol came later. First feast featured it as practical option, nothing more. Every piece carried ordinariness. Turkey became symbol later. Victorian myth elevated it. Reality was tough, wild bird boiled with everything else. Number 17. Cornmeal porridge, October 1621. Corn was the survival crop that kept colonists alive. Wampanoag gift that meant difference between starvation and survival. Squanto taught planting methods, growing techniques, harvesting timing. Without corn, Plymouth Colony would have failed completely. Pilgrims ground dried corn between stones, labor-intensive process creating coarse flour, nothing like fine wheat flour they remembered from England. The corn ground rough, full of bits of hull and germ, nutritious but unfamiliar texture. They boiled ground corn with water in large pots, simple porridge that could feed many people continuously. No milk, no butter, no sweetener. Just corn and water, creating thick mush that filled bellies, provided calories, sustained people through celebration. The porridge was bland. Of course, heavy everything English wheat porridge wasn't, but it was food. It was abundance after starvation. It was gratitude made edible through corn that Wampanoag generosity had provided. During October 1621, every spoonful of corn represented cultural exchange and colonial survival. This was indigenous crop, indigenous knowledge, indigenous generosity keeping English colonists alive. Without Wampanoag teaching, corn would have remained mysterious plant colonists didn't understand. The porridge steamed in pots throughout 3-day feast. People ate it as base for other foods, mixed it with meat stew, ate it plain when everything else ran out. Unglamorous but essential, boring but sustaining, bland but life-saving. Corn porridge doesn't appear in romantic Thanksgiving mythology. Too plain, too indigenous, too honest about dependence on native peoples. Myth prefers wheat bread, English traditions, self-sufficient colonists. Reality was coarse corn mush and humble gratitude. That cornmeal porridge tasted like survival, like alliance, like admission that English knowledge alone couldn't sustain them. Every bite was acknowledgement of debt, recognition of dependence, gratitude for indigenous generosity that meant living through another winter. Every spoonful carried truth. Corn saved colonies. Indigenous knowledge was essential. Reality was bland porridge, not romantic wheat bread. Number 18. Boiled pumpkin and squash. October 1621. Pumpkins and squash grew in Wampanoag Garden's Three Sisters. Agriculture producing abundance colonists couldn't have achieved alone. Orange vegetables, unfamiliar to English eyes, but essential to American survival. They learned to harvest them, to eat them, to be grateful for them. Pilgrims boiled pumpkin and squash chunks in water, simplest preparation, most practical for feeding crowds. No sugar to sweeten them, no spices to flavor them, no butter to enrich them. Just orange vegetables boiled plain and served because they provided food. The boiled pumpkin was watery, bland, slightly sweet from natural sugars, but nothing like dessert. They ate it as vegetable side dish, something to fill plates alongside meat and corn. Not exciting, but substantial. Not delicious, but nourishing. Squash was similar dense, mildly flavored, filling. Different varieties meant different textures, some watery, some firm, some creamy. All unfamiliar to English palates, learning what American autumn harvest looked like. During October 1621, pumpkins and squash represented successful adaptation of indigenous agriculture. Colonists learned to grow them, learned Three Sisters method, learned to appreciate vegetables that looked nothing like English turnips or cabbages they'd known. The vegetables filled bellies, provided vitamins, stored well through winter if kept whole. Practical foods that sustained life, nothing romantic or mythical about them. Just orange vegetables keeping people alive because Wampanoag had taught colonists to cultivate them. Modern myth transformed pumpkin into pie, squash into casseroles, wheatened, spiced, disguised with dairy and sugar. First feast featured them plain, boiled, honest. No pretense of being dessert, no transformation into comfort food. Just vegetables eaten because food was food. That boiled pumpkin and squash tasted like autumn, like harvest, like indigenous agricultural knowledge shared with desperate colonists. Every bite was vegetable side dish, practical nutrition. Nothing like sweet pies or marshmallow casseroles invented centuries later. Every bite carried agricultural debt. Indigenous farming methods produced harvest. Orange vegetables saved lives. Reality was plain boiled squash, no sweetening, no spice. Number 19. Wild onions and leeks. October 1621, wild onions and leeks grew in Massachusetts forests and meadows, pungent plants Wampanoag used for flavoring and medicine. Colonists learned to identify them, to gather them, to add them to cooking pots for the sharp bite English palates craved. Pilgrims foraged wild onions throughout. October small bulbs, nothing like cultivated onions from English gardens, but providing familiar flavor that made strange. American food tastes closer to home. Every wild onion was small victory against homesickness and cultural displacement. They chopped wild onions into stews, added them to porridge, used them anywhere that needed flavor. The onions were stronger than cultivated varieties, more pungent, more bitter, smaller, but intensely flavored. Little bit went long way in seasoning bland corn mush. Wild leeks grew in shaded forest. Area's colonists called them ramps eventually. Learned they appeared in spring and fall, provided onion garlic flavor that transformed simple dishes. October feast probably included them chopped into communal pots, adding depth to otherwise plain food. During October 1621, wild onions and leeks represented foraged foods that didn't require cultivation, didn't need agricultural knowledge, just required recognizing edible plants and gathering them. Wampanoag taught which plants were safe, which were flavorful, which were worth the effort to gather. The foraged onions and leeks flavored every dish at feast stews. Porridge, boiled meats all benefited from their pungent addition. Nobody ate them alone as side dish, but they influenced everything, provided the bite that made survival food more palatable. Modern Thanksgiving includes no foraged foods, everything purchased, everything cultivated, everything from grocery store or farm. First feast required foraging knowledge, required recognizing edible wild plants, required accepting that American abundance came in unfamiliar forms throughout forests and meadows. Those wild onions and leeks tasted sharp and earthy flavor of American soil, American forests, American plants. Colonists were slowly learning to recognize and use every bite was lesson in plant identification, in trusting indigenous teachers, in adapting to new land. Every bite carried wild flavor. Foraging sustained early colonists. Indigenous botanical knowledge was essential. Reality was sharp wild onions, not cultivated garden vegetables. Number 20. Dried berries. October 1621, summer berries had been dried, and stored blueberries, cranberries, strawberries, whatever Wampanoag had preserved through drying. Dried berries kept through autumn, provided fruit when nothing fresh existed, added tartness to otherwise bland meals. Pilgrims had learned berry preservation from Wampanoag women drying techniques, storage methods, ways to make summer abundance last into winter scarcity. Skills that meant difference between vitamin deficiency and health, between monotonous diet and varied food. They ate dried berries, plain or reconstituted them in water, creating something almost like sauce, though without sugar, it remained tart and medicinal tasting. Berries added to porridge, mixed into stews, eaten as garnish, providing color and flavor contrast. The dried berries were chewy, intensely flavored from concentration during drying. Tartness without sugar to balance it meant they were more medicinal than enjoyable in variety, not pleasure. Practical food source, preserving summer's gifts through autumn into winter. During October 1621, preserved foods meant survival through New England winter. Drying, smoking, salting, all preservation techniques essential when growing season lasted only months, but eating happened year-round. Berries dried in summer sustained vitamin intake when fresh fruit disappeared. Feast included dried berries as a reminder of summer's abundance and preservation skills. Colonists still hadn't mastered as well as Wampanoag. Every berry represented knowledge shared, techniques taught, generosity extended to desperate newcomers who knew nothing about surviving American seasons. Modern Thanksgiving includes no dried berry-scanned cranberry sauce replaced them, sweetened and jellied and barely recognizable as fruit. First feast featured them plain tart, honest reminder of summer stored against winter's hardship. Those dried berries tasted like summer, remembered, like preservation skills learned, like gratitude for Wampanoag women who taught English women how to make food last. Every chewy bite was cross-cultural exchange, indigenous knowledge keeping colonists alive through skills they hadn't brought from England. Every berry carried preservation, summer abundance stored for winter. Indigenous knowledge prevented scurvy. Reality was tart, dried berries, no sweetening, practical nutrition. Number 21. Roasted chestnuts. October 1621, chestnut trees grew abundantly in Massachusetts forests. American chestnuts before blight destroyed them, massive trees producing nuts that fell in autumn, providing food that could be gathered, roasted, even ground into flour. Pilgrims and Wampanoag gathered chestnuts together fall foraging that required timing and knowledge of where trees grew. Wampanoag showed colonists which forests held chestnut trees, when nuts would fall, how to recognize ripe ones worth gathering. They roasted chestnuts over open fires, simple preparation that made nuts sweet and tender. Shells split from heat, revealing creamy flesh inside. Nothing fancy, no sugarcoating, just nuts roasted like humans had done for thousands of years across multiple continents. The roasted chestnuts tasted sweet and earthy, nothing like pecans or walnuts. Lighter and less oily, more like sweet potato than typical nut. They ate them hot, burned their fingers peeling them, accepted minor discomfort for warm, substantial food. During October 1621, nuts provided fat and protein that meat couldn't always supply. Chestnuts were abundant, free, required only gathering and roasting. Practical food source that supplemented venison and fowl, added variety to feast table, provided nutrition through simple foraging. The roasted chestnuts were passed around fires, communal eating, shared food, everyone taking hot nuts and peeling them together. No individual portions, no formal serving, just people gathered around fires eating together in oldest human tradition of shared meals around flames. American chestnuts are mostly gone. Now blight destroyed them in early 1900s. Massive trees died, forests changed. First feast featured nuts from trees that no longer exist, abundance that vanished. Resource colonists couldn't have known was temporary. Those roasted chestnuts tasted like American forests before disease, before loss, before understanding that abundance can disappear. Every nut was gift from trees that survived centuries before colonists arrived, but couldn't survive century after they came. Every chestnut carried forest abundance. Simple roasting was ancient technique. Lost trees remind us nothing lasts forever. Reality was chestnuts from extinct forests, simple and sustaining. Number 22. Seethed boiled cod. October 1621. Cod filled Massachusetts waters. Atlantic cod in massive numbers. Easy to catch, easy to preserve, by salting. Reliable protein source when hunting failed. Colonists knew cod from England, familiar fish in unfamiliar abundance. Pilgrims caught cod from shore, and boats simple fishing with line and hook. Technology they'd brought from England and skills they already possessed. Unlike foraging or hunting American game, fishing required no new knowledge, just access to water teeming with fish. They seethed, the cajoled English term meaning boiled or simmered. Cod chunks in pots of water or seawater, cooked until flesh flaked, eaten hot or cold. Some cod was salted for preservation, but fresh cod at October feast needed only simple boiling. The boiled cod tasted mild and flaky, familiar flavor that reminded colonists of England, of home, of food they understood. In Feast of Strange New Foods, cod provided comfort of familiar fish prepared familiar way. Small mercy in overwhelming strangeness. During October 1621, cod represented continuity with English past. While venison and corn and squash were alien foods requiring adaptation, cod was fish they'd eaten in England, prepared the way English cooked it. One taste of home in feast, otherwise filled with unfamiliar American ingredients. The cod supplemented other proteins: venison from Wampanoag, fowl from hunting, eel from streams. Together, these proteins fed 140 people over 3 days, demonstrated abundance that gave colonists hope they might survive second winter, might actually establish permanent settlement. Modern Thanksgiving never includes cod too, associated with other meals. Not traditional enough, forgotten in myth-making, that elevated turkey and ignored fish. But first feast definitely included it: practical protein, familiar food, connection to English identity colonists hadn't entirely abandoned yet. That boiled cod tasted like England remembered, like familiar food in foreign land, like continuity with past even while learning American future. Every flaky bite was a reminder of who they'd been, even as they learned who they'd need to become. Every bite carried home. Cod connected them to England, familiar fish provided comfort. Reality was boiled cod alongside strange American foods. The real first Thanksgiving was survival feast, indigenous knowledge feeding English ignorance. Alliance, not independence. Dependence, not self-sufficiency. Myths erase indigenous contributions. Victorian Romanticism invented the lies. Corporate marketing sold them as tradition. We served them for generations. But truth matters. Wampanoag generosity enabled colonial survival, 5 deer, corn planting, foraging knowledge. Everything essential came from indigenous peoples who saved lives of strangers who'd later betray them. If this destroyed your comfortable myths, good. Hit like ready to teach real history. Drop a comment. Subscribe for truth America needs to remember. Reality is more honest than the lies we've served for centuries. Truth tastes different than myth. Always has. Always will.